Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I'm here with my good friend, Dee Pierce.
Hello.
Hello. The host is the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. How are you doing tonight, Dee?
I'm doing good, thank you. And how are you doing, Joe?
I'm doing good too.
That's good.
I'd give it a thumbs up here, but my thumbs don't show very well. There we go. Thumbs up. Okay. So, uh, our topics for tonight are the U.S. and Iran, also Yemen follies. I
Oh,
think
no, I gotta mute myself.
I think those are the follies by our people. And then there's China's strategy for countering the United States. Uh, Finally, we're going to do a piece on whether or not the CIA is a threat to our national security. That one should be interesting. And then we have a final piece that did not appear in the description, but that is new. And I'll put the link to it in the chat so you can have access to it. But it's a new piece by Pepe Escobar. And that's going to be, that's our final topic of the night. It's Russia, Iran, China, all for one and one for all. And it's a column about the the talks the three are having in Moscow almost as we speak will, of course, have great impact on the negotiations that Trump is trying to carry out with the Iranians. So let me. Uh, what am I doing here?
Yeah, let's please remember to share the show out.
Yep. And we will certainly start. I see the Earl is here. Hi. Steve Wolfbrain is here. You are late, Doc. I know I'm late. I'm normally not late, but my sound wasn't working. I had to reboot the damn thing. Steve says hi, Earl, and Earl says hi, Steve. And here's that link to the Pepe Escobar thing I promised all you guys. Okay, so there we are on that. We'll start by sharing things out on Facebook. So let's do that before we go any further. Uh, so, okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, so let's start with our first piece tonight, which is the one about the U.S. and Iran. And that is from Un's Review, and it's by Mike Whitney. It was done on April 6th. And the title of it is Trump Orders Iran to Give Up Its, quote, perfectly legal, unquote, defensive weapons. And there is a picture of Trump walking through a devastated area. It reminds me of the old saying, a very old saying concerning the Romans and the Roman Empire. That saying is, they make a desolation and call it peace. And there is Trump walking through a desolation saying, "My work here is almost done." And Mike then continues, Mike Whitney does. The Trump administration is demanding that Iran give up its strategic missile program as part of any nuclear deal. But Iran's ballistic missiles do not violate international law, nor is there any global treaty under which they are banned. Yeah, much less a treaty that Iran signed. Article 51 of the UN Charter clearly states that countries have the sovereign right to develop conventional weapons for self-defense, which means uh, uh, that Iran's missile program is perfectly legal. Iran has every right to build as many missiles as it wants, and it is not required to get Washington's approval to do so. More importantly, Iran needs these missiles to defend itself against any potential attack by the United States and Israel. This is not simply a matter of Iran's sovereign right to self-defense, but an issue of regional security that has been greatly undermined by persistent U.S.-Israel hostilities across the Middle East. I would have said across West Asia, but of course. Going on. A strong, well-armed Iran serves as a deterrent to U.S.-Israel intervention, which increases the prospects for peace in the region. Trump has also ordered Iran, and I completely agree with that statement, by the way. Trump has also ordered Iran to end its relations with regional allies Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. He could have added Iraq. I'm sure there are still some allies somewhere in Syria. If we link this demand with Trump's order that Iran abandon its ballistic missile program, we can better understand his overall strategic goal, which is to weaken and isolate Iran to the point where it is unable to defend itself against American aggression. That is the clear objective of this latest political kabuki, to goad Iran into laying the groundwork for its own destruction. When we mull over these new demands, we cannot help but wonder, quote, does any of this have anything to do with Iran's nuclear enrichment program, or is it all just a ruse aimed at concealing Trump's real motive, the disarming of Iran? Indeed, if we consider the facts as I've presented them here, it does not appear that Trump is seeking negotiations at all, but is simply putting a gun to Iran's head and saying, drop the weapon and no one gets hurt, unquote. Isn't that a more accurate description of what's going on? Check out this excerpt from an article at Iran International. Iran's supreme leader of the Ali Khamenei on Saturday ruled out the possibility of talks with the United States. In his first public speech after President Donald Trump said he sent a letter to him, quote, the insistence of some bullying governments on negotiations is not aimed at resolving issues, but rather at asserting dominance and imposing their demands, unquote, Khamenei said in a meeting with Iranian officials in Tehran. Quote, the Islamic Republic of Iran will certainly not accept their demands, unquote, he added. Responding to Khamenei's rejection of Trump's call to negotiate a nuclear agreement, the White House on Saturday reiterated the U.S. president's assertion that Tehran can be dealt with either militarily or by making a deal. Quote, we hope the Iran regime puts its people and best interests ahead of terror, unquote. White House National Security spokesman Brian Hughes said in a statement. Lebanese pro-Iranian TV channel Al Mayadeen reported Saturday Tehran had refused to enter nuclear negotiations with the United States under the conditions set by the current U.S. administration. No talks on missile capabilities or regional influence. Khamenei said the West issue is not just Tehran's nuclear program, quote, rather for them, uh, 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 rather for them, the negotiations are means to raise new demands, including restrictions on defense capabilities and international influence, unquote. While Tehran maintains that its ballistic missile program is purely defensive, the West considers it a destabilizing factor in a volatile, conflict-ridden Middle East. Khamenei rejects negotiations with the U.S. in first speech after Trump's letter, and that is a quote from Iran International. As you can see, Iranian media confirms what we said earlier. The Trump's demands are not aimed at denuclearization, but disarmament and isolation. We will provide more evidence for this later on. The Western media has done an excellent job of obfuscating the facts on this matter and have patched together a makeshift narrative that blames Iran for a crisis which is entirely Trump's fault. Fortunately, as the article states, Iran is refusing to be bullied by Trump, which is not just admirable, but smart too. Some readers might recall what happened to Libyan leader Gaddafi, who was toppled by U.S.-backed forces more than a decade ago. He was tricked into giving up his WMD programs, including his nuclear, chemical, and ballistic missile capabilities, after which he was overthrown and savagely killed by NATO-led forces in 2011. His willingness to disarm led to his untimely death and the subsequent annihilation of his country. Iran must not follow that same course of action. It must enlarge its arsenal and prepare for war. So that is Mike Whitney's statement. Iran must not follow that same course of action. It must enlarge its arsenal and prepare for war.
I agree. We've seen over and over again where you can't trust. You can't trust the U.S.
Yes, that what we've learned over time, from time to time, is the U.S. doesn't seem to be an agreement-capable country. We enter into agreements, and then we break them.
Right, because we go from one administration to the next.
Oh, not only that, we go from one administration to the next, and the guy who was in before comes in and does something completely different than he did before.
Yeah.
Okay, specifically, think of the trade agreements.
Mm-hmm.
We stand in violation of the USMCA agreement, which the Trump administration successfully negotiated with Mexico and Canada during his first term.
I
And
know,
now
it's maddening.
he decided to violate it every day, decided to walk away from it. Simply decided to walk away from it. Readers may also remember Trump pulled a similar maneuver with North Korean's Kim Jong-un. In February 2019, Trump's team, led by National Security Advisor John Bolton, met in Hanoi to discuss denuclearization talks. We actually went to Hanoi to have these talks. During the negotiations, in which Kim showed genuine interest to commit to, quote, complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, unquote, John Bolton added a poison pill provision at the 11th hour that made an agreement impossible. He demanded that Kim not only give up his nuclear weapons program, but also his ballistic missile capabilities. This demand was a key sticking point that reflected the Trump administration's broader goal of the complete disarmament and eventual destruction of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK. In short, Trump moved the goalposts at the last possible minute, sabotaged the deal, thus eliminating the possibility of a North-South reconciliation and a denuclearized Korean peninsula. This is the untold story of the Trump-Kim talks that never appeared in the media. The quote, peace candidate, unquote, deliberately scuppered his own initiative. A similar storyline is unfolding as we speak, only the stakes are much higher. We're literally on the brink of a war that could kill millions of civilians and plunge large parts of the world into chaos. It is worth noting there is no legal basis for Trump's demands. No country, however powerful, has the right to dictate whether another country can have ballistic missiles, or who they can have as allies, or whether they can develop nuclear energy or not. Under Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, which the United States is a party to, by the way, and Iran is a party to also, all parties to the treaty have the, quote, inalienable right, unquote, to develop research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without a discrimination. This includes the right to participate in the fullest possible exchange of equipment, materials, and scientific and technological information for peaceful purposes. Unquote. Iran not only signed the NPT, it has also repeatedly shown its willingness to allay the suspicions of its critics by agreeing to additional protocols and, quote, confidence building, unquote, measures that no other member has ever been required to make. In other words, they have allowed themselves to be treated like second-class citizens who must follow specifically designed restrictions just to placate their perennial antagonists in Washington and Tel Aviv. Okay. Is that fair? Well, my response to that, of course, it's not fair. But the fact is, the reality is, the world is not fair. The United States is not fair. I'm not defending the United States, okay, in this aspect of things. Trump, in particular, was never accused of being a fair person. So I don't know whether fairness comes into this or not. It comes into it, however, for the Iranians who are demanding to be treated like a sovereign nation. That's a part of the disagreement. Also, what's apropos to add here is that Israel is not a signator of the NPT. They never even agreed to it. We are a signator to that treaty. But of course, we already have our nuclear weapons, so, we're not forced to give them up under that treaty, which, by the way, I think was unfair from the beginning. Everybody should have been forced to give it up. But that wasn't possible, right? So we only restricted it to countries that at the time did not have any nuclear weapons. So that's not fair to begin with, but it is reality. As Scott Ritter has been saying for the last number of weeks, okay, so Trump has given an ultimatum, to Iran. It is reminiscent of the ultimatums given by Hitler to other nations, particularly Czechoslovakia, before World War II. It is just like that. It is just like that. You do what we want, or we're going to assault you. We're going to bomb you. And you know what? The citizens of the United States in general are not in open arms about that. We are not up in open arms. We seem to think it's the right of Trump and the administration in the U.S. to, give ultimata to other sovereign states and tell them, if you don't do what we want, we're going to bomb the hell out of you. Well, according to international law, we have no right to do that, at all. Going on with the article, the international community, including the UN and IAEA, has consistently affirmed that Iran, like any NPT signatory, has a legitimate right to peaceful nuclear energy. This was a key premise of the JCPOA, which allowed Iran to maintain a limited enrichment program up to 3.67% under strict kind of monitoring in exchange for sanctions relief. In other words, Iran agreed to the onerous inspection regime imposed by the United States and acted in good faith, expecting Washington would keep its words and hold up its end of the bargain. But the U.S. broke its word when Trump impulsively shrugged off his obligations and walked away, again raising the issue of whether the U.S.'s agreement capability, or I should say, is agreement capable. But why? Why did Trump abandon the JCPOA when the treaty employed a hyper-vigilant inspections regime that ensured that Iran was not diverting enriched uranium to a secret nuclear weapons program? Why? Says Mike Whitney. Because of Israel. That's why. Because it was never about, quote, secret nuclear weapons programs, unquote. That was always the fake pretext for hectoring, harassing, and demonizing Iran. The real objective is on full display in Trump's list of demands. What he wants is the complete dismantling of Iran's defensive weapons systems, accompanied by Iran's forced isolation and military encirclement. The United States and Israel wants a vulnerable Iran that will collapse into anarchy following the massive nuclear airstrikes and decapitation operations that are coming in the near future. The goal is to make sure that Israel emerges as the dominant power in the region. Not just that Israel emerge as the dominant power, in the region. I think the goal is to make sure that Israel is able to achieve its objective of greater Israel, extending from the Nile River to the Euphrates. It seems to me that's the real goal here. Because if Israel becomes the dominant military power and no one can stand up to them, that is what's going to happen in the end. By the way, Elon Musk's AI progeny, Grok, agrees with our basic analysis on this matter. Check it out. As of April 3rd, 2025, during his second term as U.S. president, Donald Trump, this is a quote from Grok, is demanding a comprehensive set of concessions from Iran to reach a new nuclear deal or any broader agreement. His approach, dubbed, quote, maximum pressure 2.0, unquote, builds on his first-term policies, but is more aggressive, aiming not only to curb Iran's nuclear program, but also dismantle its regional influence and military capabilities. Here's a detailed breakdown of what Trump is demanding based on public statements, policy documents, and reports. One, complete halt and rollback of nuclear program. No enrichment, dismantle infrastructure. Uh, Also, the destruction or international control of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, including centrifuges and heavy water reactors. Quote, verifiable displacement, unquote, of all nuclear related facilities per a White House fact sheet. Permanent inspections, quote, 24/7 access, unquote, to all sites, including military ones. This is what Grok said. No, none of the above conditions are required under the terms of the NPT. Trump is simply concocting whatever restrictions come to mind so he can claim, quote, noncompliance, unquote, and launch airstrikes. Here's more from Grok. 2, abandonment. Okay, abandonment of ballistic missile program. Full dismantlement. Trump demands Iran give up its entire ballistic missile program, including short, uh, uh, medium, and long-range missiles like the Shahab, the Emad, and the Khorramshahr series. 3, Iran must sever ties with regional proxies and allies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas. Trump insists Iran cut all financial, military, and political support for groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, which he labels, quote, terrorist proxies, unquote. That again is from Grok. As you can see, none of this has anything to do with nuclear enrichment, secret weapons programs, or nonproliferation. What we're seeing is the predictable behavior of a politician who was shoehorned into the Oval Office on the back of more than $100 million in campaign contributions from wealthy Zionist donors. Don't forget the $245 million that was given to him by Elon Musk. In my humble opinion, says Mike, those donations were made with a clear understanding Trump would launch a war on Israel's most formidable enemy, Iran. The United States is being dragged into another Middle East bloodbath as payback to the Israeli donor class. Well, he probably should have said the Israeli American donor class, because that's what they are. In other words, they're Americans who are extremely devoted to Israel. Here we are. Okay, so that was the state of play when Mike actually wrote this on April 6th. It now is April 8th. Things are a little different. Okay, over the last 2 days, we'll go over how they've changed. But right now, I'm going to see what your first comments are. Okay, and then D is going to turn to a similar article, or an article stating some similar views, but in a different and very good way, by Alistair Crook. But let me look at our comments so far. Steve has shared it to his Facebook groups. And there's an icon, okay, from Evelina. I think she's waving. Evelina says, if not a signatory to the NPT, does it make Israel exempt from obligations? Yeah, it does. I mean, they have no legal obligations to the NPT, and everybody knows they've, at the time of the signing of the NPT, they already had a considerable number of nuclear weapons. Now their nuclear weapons are estimated at roughly 200 or more. Evelina says, and is that why it did not sign in the first place? Also, what is the reason for Israel's secrecy regarding its possession of nuclear arms? Well, it doesn't want to admit that it has any because, uh, well, I don't really know why it continues to play that game. Everybody knows it has those weapons. Uh, Everybody assumes it has those weapons. I think it doesn't want to openly admit it has those weapons because uh, then I think the United States and the other powers would be in a very poor position, when they negotiated with other states, trying to prevent them, from gaining nuclear weapons. After all, if Israel went public and said we had it, then what sensible basis would the United States have to insist that Iran not have any nuclear weapons? Now, everybody knows that Israel has it, but there's been no admission. So there's no public acknowledgement that, yes, we have it. It all seems like it's kabuki to me. Uh, and I think Iran should assert. Why are you insisting we get rid of our nuclear weapons when you know Israel damn well has 200 of them already? What the hell are you doing coming to us? I think the United States should be publicly called out by all the nations of the world on this. Anyway, let's get to our second piece. So, Dee, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I will share it. It's a piece by Alistair Crook. It's
Okay.
a rather great piece, as most of his pieces are.
Oh, yes, they are.
They are wonderful. His thinking is so subtle. Okay, there we go.
Break a leg. That old mafia warning. Trump has threatened Iran over an ultimatum that likely cannot be met. Alistair Crook, April 7th, 2025.
And there is Mr. Mafioso himself, Donald Trump.
What is understood now is that we're no longer playing chess. There are no rules anymore. Trump's ultimatum to Iran. Colonel Doug McGregor compares the Trump ultimatum to Iran to which Austria-Hungary delivered to Serbia in 1914, an offer, in short, that could not be refused. Serbia accepted 9 out of the 10 demands, but it refused 1, and Austria-Hungary immediately declared war. On 4 February, shortly after his inauguration, President Trump signed a national security presidential memorandum, that is to say, a legally binding directive requiring government agencies to carry out the specific actions precisely. The demands are that Iran should be denied a nuclear weapon, denied intercontinental missiles, and denied to other asymmetric and conventional weapons capabilities. All these demands go beyond the NPT and existing JCPOA. To this end, the NSPM directs maximum economic pressure be imposed, that the U.S. Treasury act to drive Iran's oil exports to zero, that the U.S. would work to trigger JCPOA snapback of sanctions, and that Iran's, quote, malign influence abroad, its, quote, proxies, be neutralized. The UN sanctions snapback expires in October, so time is short to fulfill the procedural requirements to snapback. All this suggests why Trump and Israeli officials give spring as a deadline to a negotiated agreement. Trump's ultimatum to Iran appears to be moving the U.S. down a path to where war is the only outcome, as occurred in 1914, an outcome which ultimately triggered World War I. Might this just be Trump bluster? Possibly, but it does sound as if Trump is issuing legally binding demands such that he must expect cannot be met. Acceptance of Trump's demands would leave Iran neutered and stripped of its sovereignty, at the very least. This is an implicit, quote, tone to these demands, too, that is one of threatening and expecting regime change in Iran as its outcome. It may be Trump bluster, but the president has formed past convictions on this issue. He has unabashedly hewed to the Netanyahu line on Iran that the JCPOA or any deal with Iran was, quote, bad. In May 2014, Trump withdrew the U.S. from the JCPOA at Netanyahu's behest, and
Uh,
instead,
yeah, just a comment on that. Uh, I think that was in May. Was it 2017, 2018,
Mhm,
2019? Okay, in one of those years that he withdrew from the JCPOA, but it obviously wasn't in 2014 because he wasn't the president then.
right. And instead issued a new set of 12 demands to Iran, including permanently and verifiably abandoning its nuclear program in perpetuity and erasing all uranium enrichment. What is the difference between those earlier Trump demands and those of this February? Essentially, they are the same, except today he says if Iran doesn't make a deal, there will be bombing. He will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before. Thus, there is both history and the fact that Trump is surrounded, on this issue at least, by a hostile cabal of Israeli firsters and superhawks. Witkoff is there, but is poorly grounded on the issues. Trump, too, has shown himself virtually totalitarian in terms of any and all criticism of Israel in American academia, and in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, he is fully supportive of Netanyahu's far-right provocative and expansionist agenda. These demands regarding Iran also run counter to the 25 March 2025 latest annual U.S. intelligence threat assessment that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. This intelligence assessment is effectively disregarded. A few days before its release, Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, clearly stated that the Trump administration is seeking the, quote, full dismantlement of Iran nuclear weapons program. Quote, Iran has to give up its program in a way that the entire world can see, Waltz said. Quote, it's time for Iran to walk away completely from its desire to have a nuclear weapon. On the other hand, it seems that behind these ultimata sounds a president made, quote, pissed off and angry of his inability to end the Ukraine war almost immediately, as he first mooted, together with pressure from a bitterly fractured Israel and a volatile Netanyahu to compress the timeline for the speedy finishing off of the Iranian regime, which it is claimed has never been weaker, all so that Israel can normalize with Lebanon and even Syria, and with Iran supposedly disabled, pursue implementation of the Greater Israel Project to be normalized across the Middle East, which on the other hand will enable Trump to pursue the, quote, long overdue grand pivot to China. And China is energy vulnerable regime change in Tehran would be a calamity from the Chinese perspective.
Yes, because the Iranians provide 40% of China's oil.
To be plain, Trump's China strategy needs to be in place too in order to advance Trump's financial system rebalancing plans. For should China feel itself besieged, it could well act as a spoiler to Trump's reworking of the American and global financial systems. The Washington Post reports on a secret Pentagon memo from Hegseth that China now is the department's sole pacing threat, with denial of a Chinese fight comply siege of Taiwan, while simultaneously defending the U.S. homeland. The force planning construct, a concept of how the Pentagon will build and resource the armed services to take on perceived threats, will only consider conflict with Beijing when planning contingencies for a major power war. The Pentagon memo says leaving the threat from Moscow largely to be attended by European allies.
Okay, I can't easily express how silly this memo is.
It is.
I mean, obviously, the European allies are completely unable to handle the threat up from Moscow if Moscow decides to attack them. There's
If
no
Mo-
way in hell they could handle Moscow. And Moscow has 1.5 million troops right now. There's nowhere near that number of troops for the Europeans. They don't have the same equipment. They can't well coordinate. They have inferior generals leading them. They don't, have an integrated air defense. They're open to immediate attacks from the Oreshniks towards their major cities. I mean, this is a silly notion. Leave it to the Europeans to handle Moscow.
it's insane.
It's
And you know that they're fortunate that Moscow doesn't have any intentions.
very fortunate that Moscow doesn't have any intentions, but it may begin to develop some intentions
Hmm.
if there are wars going on in certain other areas, and they come to think that maybe the United States needs a diversion in Europe.
Yes.
Of course, from Trump's point of view, he may not care what happens to Europe.
No, he doesn't care anymore.
Okay, so this notion that he's leaving the threat from Moscow to the European allies uh, uh, may be a calculation. Well, Moscow's not going to attack them anyway, so we don't have to worry about that. But if Moscow doesn't attack them anyway, and Moscow just puts in a small defensive force to hold off the Europeans because they're not going to do anything, that frees up the Russians to put troops on the ground in West Asia.
Right, and that's what Trump's main thing is. It's West Asia. That whole Greater Israel.
Yeah, he seems to be turning away from Europe completely, entirely. And what he's trying to do is finish off things in West Asia. So Israel is dominant in that, so he can turn to China.
Yeah.
Please go on.
Trump wants to be powerful enough, credibility to threaten China militarily, and therefore wants Putin to agree speedily to a ceasefire in Ukraine so that military resources can quickly be moved to the China threat theater.
Exactly.
On his flight back to Washington last Sunday evening, Trump reiterated his annoyance toward Putin, but added, quote, "I don't think he's going to go back on his word. I've known him for a long time. We've always gotten along well." Asked when he wanted Russia to agree to a ceasefire, Trump said there was a psychological deadline. "If I think they're tapping us along, I will not be happy about it." Trump,
Trump always amazes me. He expects other people to keep their word, okay, and their agreement, but he always feels free to break agreements.
Yeah,
whenever he thinks they're not good agreements.
exactly.
So,
Trump's venting against Russia may, perhaps, have an element of reality TV to it for his domestic audience. He needs to be perceived as bringing peace through strength to keep up the alpha male appearance, lest the truth of his lack of leverage over Putin becomes all too apparent for the American public and to the world. Part of the reason for Trump's frustration to maybe his cultural formation as a New York businessman that a deal is about first dominating the negotiations and then quickly splitting the difference. This, however, is not how diplomacy works. The transactional approach also reflects deep conceptual flaws. The Ukraine ceasefire process is stalled, not because of Russian intransigence, but rather because Team Trump has determined that achieving a settlement in Ukraine comes firstly through insisting on a unilateral and immediate ceasefire, without introducing temporary governance to enable elections in Ukraine nor addressing the root cause of the conflict. And secondly, because Trump rushed in without listening to what the Russians were saying and or without hearing it. Now that initial pleasantries are over, and Russia is saying flatly that currently ceasefire proposals simply are inadequate and unacceptable. Trump becomes angry and lashes out at Putin, saying that 25% tariffs on Russian oil could happen any moment. Putin and Iran are both now under deadlines, a psychological one in Putin's case, so as to enable Trump to proceed with credibility, threatening China to come to a deal soon, as the global economy is already wobbling. Trump fumes and spits fires. He tries to hurry matters along by making a big show of bombing the Houthis, boasting that they have been hit hard, with many Houthi leaders killed. Yet, such callousness towards Yemeni civilian death sits awkwardly with his claimed heart-rending empathy for the thousands of handsome Ukrainian young men needlessly dying on the front lines. It all becomes reality TV. Trump threatens Iran with, quote, bombing the likes of which they have never seen before, over an ultimatum that likely cannot be met. Simply put, this threat, which includes the possible use of nuclear weapons, is not given because Iran poses a threat to the US. It does not. But it is given as an option, a plan, a thing placed calmly on the geopolitical table and intended to spread fear. Quote, cities full of children, women, and the elderly to be killed. Not morally wrong, not a crime. No, just the reality that Trump thinks the Iranian nuclear program to be an existential threat to Israel, and that the U.S. is committed to using military force to eliminate existential threats to Israel. This is the heart of Trump's ultimatum. It owes to the fact that it is Israel, not America, and not the U.S. intelligence community that views Iran as an existential threat. Professor Hudson, speaking with direct knowledge of the background policy, says, quote, it's not just that Israel as we know it must be safe and secure and free from terrorism. That's Trump and his team's line. That's the Israeli and its supporters' narrative, too. But the mentality behind it is different, Hudson says. There are some 2.3 million Israelis who see themselves as destined to control all of what we call the Middle East, the Levant, what some call West Asia, and others call, quote, Greater Israel. These Zionists believe that they are mandated by God to take this land, and that all who oppose them are Amalek. They believe that Amalek to be consumed with an overwhelming desire to kill Jews. and who therefore should be annihilated. The Torah records the story of Amalek. Hashat ki tezai, when the Torah states, I guess, Joe, you want to read that?
Parshat ki let's see, taitzai, when the Torah states, Mahu timshe et Zechar Amalek, that we must erase the memory of Amalek. Every year, we Jews are obligated to read not how God will destroy Amalek, but how we should destroy Amalek. Though many Jews puzzle how to reconcile this particular mitzvah with their ingrained contrarian values of compassion and mercy. I, for one, do not puzzle how to reconcile this particular mitzvah with our values of compassion, and mercy, because I simply reject this, as a mitzvah, and I reject this part of the Torah as utterly unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I feel about it.
Right, because it just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. It's just a part of ancient mythology.
Right.
It has no place in today's world.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, and by the way, for saying that,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Jews who believe this would immediately classify myself, as Amalek,
It's crazy.
destruction. They arrogate to themselves the right to decide who is Jewish and who is not. But two can play that game. From my point of view, they are no longer Jewish. They have
Mm-hmm.
given up their religion to this fantasy of Amalek.
Right, and it says here, and especially that one line when it says how God will destroy Amalek. God, they're not God. They're not. Who that, it's crazy.
It is crazy. Please go
Okay.
on.
This commandment in the Torah is in fact one of the key factors that lies at the root of Israel's obsession with Iran. Israelis perceive Iran as an Amalek tribe, plotting to kill Jews. No deal, no compromise, therefore, is possible. It is also, of course, about Iran's strategic challenge, about secular to the Israeli state.
Okay, this point of view is historically, it's just historical idiocy, because when the ancient Israelis were scattered to the winds by the Babylonians, it was the Persians, um, um, the Iranians, under Cyrus, who allowed them to return to Israel, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild. It was the Persians who did that. So far from plotting to kill Jews, they restored Jews to their former nation.
Hmm.
That's the historical truth of the matter. Please go on.
And what has made the Trump ultimatum so pressing in Washington's view, apart from the China pivot considerations, was the assassination of Syed Hassan Nasrallah. That assassination marked a big shift in U.S. thinking because before that, we inhabited an era of careful calculation, incremental moves up an escalator ladder. What is understood now is that weapons no longer that they're no longer playing chess. There are no rules anymore. Israel, meaning Netanyahu, is going hell for leather on all fronts to mitigate the divisions and turmoil at home in Israel through igniting the Iranian front, even though his course might well threaten Israel's destruction. This later prospect marks the reddest of red lines to ingrained deep state structures.
Yes. Okay, so that's it for that piece. It pretty much depicts the same picture, as Mike Whitney constructed,
Hmm.
with more nuance on the cultural aspect, and of course, with a specific focus on some of the thinking of some of the Israelis, of I guess maybe 30 to 40% of the Israelis today. The Amalek thing, okay, is really possessing them. So that adds some coloring to the situation, but it backs up the ultimatums uh, that are coming from Trump, that are backed actually by the Israelis and by the donor class here. Let us now turn to our comments and see. The Earl Journal says, Democrats, look how Trump works for Putin. Is he working for Putin? I mean, is Putin really desiring that there's a war between the Iranians and Israel and the United States? Somehow, I don't think so. The idea that he's working for Putin in West Asia is ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous. Steve says Iran could probably build a nuclear bomb in a week and probably should. Uh, yes, except that the supreme leader thinks that nuclear weapons, a Hamran, against the religion, and he's been resisting building a uh, a nuclear bomb since 2002. That's a long time now. Earl says Trump is running the country like he's playing Civilization on his computer. Is that the way you play Civilization on your computer? Evelyn Pont says, I thought the notion of Amalek appeared in the Talmud. Uh, I think there are passages in the Talmud, but okay, if I recall, the first time Amalek appears, okay, is in I think the first time Amalek appears is in Genesis, okay, because uh, when Abraham first came uh, to Israel, uh, okay, the Israelis fought, or the Hebrews fought with other tribes inside, okay, Palestine. And one of the tribes they fought with, uh, um, 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 was the Amalekites at that point. Then I think, okay, that Amalek appears again. Uh, uh, okay, I think they appear again, okay, in the book, okay, of Joshua. Okay, and there, they appear as once again, threatening Israel. Okay, and that's where I guess the worst of the language, the genocidal language, uh, is that people are now quoting, uh, mostly comes, okay, from there. I don't, remember whether there's any mention of Amalek in the Talmud, but it's possible. Uh, and even says, and the Torah was more akin to Judaism. Can you give one major difference between the teachings of one versus the other? Well, I think the Talmud is much more detailed. Okay, in other words, the Talmud is a book of interpretations, okay, and expansions of the Torah. And it's not simply the Talmud, there's the Mishnah also. In other words, there are many parts of the Torah that, of course, are vague and ambiguous. So in later years, uh, scholars, different schools of scholarship, would interpret, okay, the Torah, uh, and they were responsible for both for developing the Mishnah, okay, and the Talmud, okay, as well. Uh, I think that all three of these are part of Judaism as it developed over a period of time. Then there are much later commentaries, of course, all through the Middle Ages. There are lots and lots of commentaries, that are different. Okay, then there are the commentaries that come out of Spain. They're very, very important. And then later commentaries from Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia, countries like that are also very important. Okay, so if I had to give one major difference, I would say that the Talmud is much more detailed in terms of the interpretations and the prescriptions and the ideas of how Jews ought to behave on a day-to-day basis. Okay, the five books of Moses are the Torah, and the five books of Moses uh, don't have really detailed kinds of guidance. In other words, they're more, I would characterize them as as a semi-mythological quasi-history. And the Talmud is much more modern. Okay, it dates from the period. When does it date from? I guess the Talmud starts appearing, with the writings of Hillel, uh, before the appearance of Jesus. Uh, and the Talmud, uh, I think, development of the Talmud continues, with other rabbis uh, uh, through the first century A.D., also through the second century A.D., okay, and even later. I used to know all this, but I've largely forgotten it because I was studying it in my teens, and it's been many, many years since then, I'm afraid. And my recollection is vague. I occasionally look up, little details, to refresh my memory, but I did not do that for tonight. Okay, so let us move on. The next thing we're going to take up is a piece from Larry Johnson. It's on the topic of Yemen, okay, and the attacks, on Yemen. And the title of it, okay, is Attack uh, uh, by Yemen? Question mark. Yeah, I warned you, Mr. Trump. And the author is Larry C. Johnson. And this one was written, okay, on April 6th. And Larry, let me see if I can just scroll down. There we go. There's a picture of, I believe that's it's an MQ-9 Reaper drone. The Yemenis have by now shot down a squadron of those. Uh, what surprises me is that many in Washington, D.C. and media are surprised by the failure of the latest phase of Operation Prosperity Guardian to quell the Houthis, also known by their official name, of Ansar Allah. As Homer Simpson is prone to say, duh, here's the latest from CNN. Quote, U.S. airstrikes in Yemen will not be enough to defeat the Houthi movement. The only way to break the resistance may be a ground operation, CNN reports, citing sources, and analysts. Well, when it comes to ground operations, we don't have very much to offer these days, since we've been largely dismantling the army since the end of the first Iraq War. U.S. airstrikes in Yemen will not be enough to defeat the Houthi movement. The only way to break the resistance may be a ground operation, CNN reports citing sources and analysts. The channel claims the American bombings have not caused serious damage to the Houthi political and military leadership or their missile launchers. This is confirmed by the rebels' regular attacks on targets in Israel and on the American fleet in the Red Sea. The TV channel recalled that the cost of the air operation initiated by Washington against the Houthis has already reached $1 billion. One official told CNN that U.S. resources in this direction are running out. Yeah, I think that's true too. Yes, sir, says Larry, just what we need. That was the end of that quote, by the way. Yes, sir, says Larry, just what we need. A new U.S. invasion of a sovereign country in the Middle East. I am certain that will calm the jitters of already panicked financial markets around the globe, that the price of oil will plummet to new lows. For those of you immune to sarcasm, this is sarcasm, says Larry. As I am writing this, the financial markets in Asia are crashing. By the time you read this on Monday morning Eastern Time, the U.S. markets are likely to be rattled. And that is just from Trump's tariff ploy. While the smart guys, smart as in quotes, guys and gals in Washington, D.C. are feigning surprise over this development, my readers have been informed of the feckless nature of a U.S.-led bombing campaign to force the Houthis into submission. The mobile launchers that the Houthis use are virtually impossible to identify and destroy before they launch a missile or drone. Why? Because the Houthis have perfected the art of shoot and scoot, says Larry. Operation Prosperity Guardian has exposed the glaring weakness of U.S. reliance on overhead imagery and electronic surveillance. U.S. efforts to use MQ-9 drones to spot potential launch sites. Those drones can provide immediate intelligence, is proven to be an expensive disaster. The Houthis claim to have drowned 17 Reapers during the past 16 months. Each Reaper costs a minimum of $30 million. If the Houthis' numbers are correct, the cost of those destroyed drones tops $500 million. Speaking of costs, each day the U.S. Carrier Strike Group, CSG, is deployed in the Red Sea and firing air defense missiles against missiles and drones fired by Houthis is costing multiple millions of dollars. And many of the air defense missiles the U.S. is cranking off are in short supply and cannot be easily and quickly built to restock the dwindling inventories. Only way to stop the Houthis without employing a U.S. ground force, and even that is questionable, is to penetrate the Houthi chain of command with human assets who can then report where and when a missile will be launched. While recruiting, training, and managing such a sensitive human asset is not impossible, the CIA might be better off buying some mega million lottery tickets in hopes of hitting the jackpot. I think that's sarcasm too. No, I'm not sure. That's the Houthis thwarted Joe Biden's attempts to silence them, and Donald Trump and his national security team is starting to realize they have no military solution to stop the Houthis from imposing an embargo on Israeli ships in the Red Sea. Oh, by the way, I have a comment to make on that. Uh, I seem to recall that the Houthis started their blockade of the Red Sea just after October 7th, 2023. I also seem to remember that those early efforts from the Houthis uh, were not all that frequent. They did disturb shipping. It was a blockade that was effective and has cost Israel very, very dearly. Uh, but what the Houthis kind of started with uh, was drones. You know, they would use drones. Uh, and they would use maybe a few short range missiles. They would use some cruise missiles, occasionally, to try to hit a target in Haifa, or in Tel Aviv, somewhere. All of that involved, a minimal amount of damage. Over a period of time, the interventions by the Houthis became more frequent. All this was going on while Hezbollah was hitting Israel with rocket attacks from the north that were much more frequent and much more important than the Houthi efforts. But then, suddenly, with the breaking of the ceasefire, not long ago by the Israelis, suddenly the Houthis started shooting rockets and missiles all over. And recently, they've been using the Palestine 2, a hypersonic missile, to really seriously attack Tel Aviv. And there doesn't seem to be any air defense against them that the Israelis are able to employ. And their depredations, in the Red Sea are much more serious also. And then, of course, they've launched serious attacks against the carrier strike group in the Red Sea. They've hit the Harry Truman 7 times. They've actually sunk an American ship, according to latest reports. They've become a more serious threat to Israel than Hezbollah was earlier. They're not getting weaker as time goes on. They're getting stronger. And they're not weakening at all in response to the bombings that we're delivering them over the last, since March 15th, I guess it is. So it's 3 weeks now, right? And they're not scaling down at all in their attacks on our Navy and their attacks on Israel. I mean, these guys are they're just ready to go. They're always ready to go. Going on with the article, I think we're actually coming to the end of it. Yeah. The U.S. murder of a tribal group in Yemen over the weekend is likely to inspire the Houthis to step out their attacks on U.S. targets in Israel in the coming days. Trump can holler and threaten till he's blue in the face, and is not going to force a change in the Houthis' commitment to pressure the West to stop the genocide in Palestine. I agree with that. I think all that is true, but I want to ask the basic question here. The basic question here is if the U.S., including using B 52 bombers and B 2 bombers, cannot douse the flames in Yemen, cannot pin down the Houthis and win against them, how can Trump expect to be successful against Iran, which is many times more powerful than the Houthis and has an air defense system? The Houthis have no air defense system to speak of. We go over there, we kill their civilians. They don't have much of an air defense. But Iran has an integrated air defense. They have S-400s. They have domestic versions, which are pretty good. And as each month goes by, they're getting stronger and stronger. And their stock of missiles, of hypersonic missiles, is getting larger and larger. How can we expect to prevail against Iran if we attack them, if we can't even prevail against the Houthis, against Ansarallah? I mean, I think the Houthis are formidable. I really do. But they are nowhere near the strength of Iran. This is ridiculous to think. It's ridiculous to think that a military force that cannot even overcome the Houthis is going to be able to be successful against Iran. Who is advising Trump that this is possible? They must be insane. So I'll stop sharing that at this point and return to your comments, see if you have any more. Thanks. Still trying to assimilate some people's preference for one or the other, but I think I'll stop trying for now anyway. I'm still trying to figure out the Bible. LOL. Well, okay, the Bible. Uh, the Bible includes the 5 books of Moses. So the Bible includes the Torah, okay, which is a subset, okay, of the Bible. But the Bible includes many more books other than the 5 books of Moses. And the Bible doesn't include any of the Talmud, okay, and any of the Mishnah. Not part of the Bible. These are later writings. Okay. So, okay, D?
We're living in complete insanity.
Yeah, we're living. It seems to get more and more insane by the day. And these tariffs. I mean, these tariffs.
It's disgusting.
Stupid.
Oh, complete stupidity. And then what, tonight at midnight? Well, the 104% tariff on China at midnight, 12:01, meaning 12:01 tomorrow. It's sick.
Okay, so you know what's going to happen? China is just going to stop trading with the United States.
Definitely. Why bother?
2 blocks are going to form. Those nations willing to trade with the United States, and those nations who are just going to rely on the BRICS countries.
And that's the end of Walmart and a lot of stores here.
It's the end of Walmart, okay, in a lot of stores, but more than that, the BRICS group uh, uh, simply has a much larger population base than we have, and their countries are getting richer by the year. and they've got a long way to go to develop. And if we're going to develop any further, we need to trade with them. And if we can trade with them because they've given up on the dollar over the long period of time, that is going to be very damaging to the United States. And the tariffs are raising large trade barriers to continue trade with most of the world. So there it is. Anyway, apropos of the tariffs and apropos of the stupidity of our international foreign policy altogether, the next article is a pretty interesting one from Wabin. It's also a pretty short one, but I think it's pretty important.
Okay.
It's a rare 500-word article from uh,
Webin.
Wabin. Yes,
China's strategy to defeat the U.S. Bankrupted with Trump's help.
and there goes Trump. He's just helping by putting on 105% tariffs.
He's, it's maddening. You can't make this stuff up.
There it is, striking a Mussolini pose once again. There he is, the orange Mussolini.
As Trump rolls out his tariffs on the world on, quote, Liberation Day, China watches with glee. It doesn't happen every day when one's adversary blows his head off in front of you on his own initiative. Talk about the never interrupt your enemy when he's making the mother of all mistakes. The inevitable result of Trump's tariff war will be a severe disruption to the global supply chain. As a nation who sits at the bottom end of the supply chain with its overconsumption and reliance on imports for both consumer and business needs, such a disruption will lead to inflation and an economic recession. To counter higher inflation and economic downturn, the Fed will have to raise interest rates and the government will increase spending to stimulate the economy. As the U.S. government spending already accounts for a quarter of the GDP, higher interest payments and move expenditures will further increase deficit, forcing more debt borrowing and more deficits, a perfect vicious cycle.
Okay, so here I have to remark, of course, that the size of the debt and the size of the debt to GDP ratio doesn't matter from the point of view, of a sovereign. We don't even have to have, higher interest payments because if we want to, we can stop issuing the debt instruments entirely. Now, I understand that not many people understand that, but I'm sure there's someone who will tell Trump at some point that he really doesn't have to issue any debt instruments if he doesn't want to.
Mhm.
But however high the interest payments become, since the United States is a monetary sovereignty, we can meet whatever higher interest payments uh, uh, there are. But it's probable that Trump is never going to stop issuing debt instruments because who gets the higher interest payments? Well, richer people, corporations, uh, and so on. So many of his own backers are going to be profiting from the higher interest payments. So he may keep on issuing debt. But that has no impact on the fiscal sustainability of the United States, whatever. Now, further increasing the deficit. Uh, Depending on the kind of deficit, if you further increase the deficit, that might cause some problems. You might have inflation. It depends on how you're spending the deficit wholly. Probably the Trump administration will spend the deficit in the wrong way. That can probably be counted on. Oh,
Hmm.
also, when you further increase the deficit, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to increase the debt. It's just the way we do things. We issue debt instruments uh, in the same amount, okay, as we have a deficit. But we don't have to do that. It's just our policy. Okay, so we could do other things. Okay, Wabin doesn't understand that we can do other things. So that part of what he has to say has to be taken with a grain of salt.
Hmm.
Okay, please go on.
Okay. It is clear the U.S. is focused on militarily confronting China in Taiwan. China's military advancement is forcing the U.S. to spend huge amounts of money to get ready for war. The recently announced F-47 sixth-generation fighter program, developing hypersonic missile technology to catch with China and Russia, developing hypersonic defense, preparing for space warfare such as the orbital carrier concept from Gravics, upgrading naval shipbuilding for both surface vessels and submarines, investing in large-scale swarming drones, military AI and robotics, upgrading nuclear arsenal, fortressing Guam for potential Chinese attacks, building and fortifying military bases in Japan and the Philippines. The for-profit U.S. military-industrial complex will pile in to maximize cost. Those include not only the five oligarchs monopolizing arms sales today, but new entrants peddling overpriced new solutions such as Anduril and SpaceX. Expect to see more uh, no-bids contracts like the Boeing F-47 program. As China currently spends less than 1.5% GDP on defense vis-a-vis 3.5% for the US and 2% global average, China can easily afford to up the ante and trigger further military spending for the US, just as the US bankrupted the USSR to win the Cold War. History is repeating itself, and China will force the US to spend its way to defeat. Sun Tzu defined the best way strategy is to win without fighting. Despite his rhetoric, Trump is solving none of the structural issues facing the U.S. infrastructure: education, lack of manufacturing competitiveness, overburdened finance. With his insane tariffs, he is bifurcating the world into two camps: the high cost and high barrier US led West, and the low cost, low barrier China led global South. As Trump spends, baby speaks into bankruptcy, China has its best unpaid agent in the White House.
Okay, and that's it. Okay, I thought that was interesting,
Yes,
but where it's wrong is that it's possible for China to drive the U.S. into bankruptcy.
right, and that's not possible.
There's no such thing. There's no such thing as bankruptcy for a monetarily sovereign nation. So why did the USSR go into bankruptcy? Well, it didn't actually go into bankruptcy. Uh, what it did is it broke up. One of the successor states uh, uh, was Russia. That, of course, was the major successor state. So what happened to Russia? Uh, well, they developed some debts in currencies that were not their own. And furthermore, there was inflation inside of Russia. That was very, very important. And they were in, dire straits in 1997 and, in 1998. Nevertheless, they could have continued. They could have continued with the currency they had. Nothing was forcing them to default on their debts, but they did actually default. The default was voluntary.
Mhm.
Nothing was forcing them to do that. So, in other words, the US did not drive the USSR into bankruptcy. And after the USSR broke up, there was nothing that was driving Russia into bankruptcy except for a misunderstanding of the actual fiscal facts. All Russia had to do in 1997 and 1998 was to make a public announcement, all debts will be paid on time and in full. And that would have ended the panic. There was a financial panic, run on the ruble because everybody was expecting Russia to default and they cooperated. They default. But a similar thing had happened a few years before that, okay, in Italy. And the world was panicking over the lira in Italy. And Italy made an announcement that all debts would be paid on time and in full. And they proceeded to create the money to pay those debts. And the panic went away because the Italians decided to do that. The Russians decided something different. Okay, they eventually got out of trouble anyway, but they didn't have to default on their debts. They chose to do so.
Mhm.
And okay, if the United States has very high debts, well, first of all, the U.S. won't have debts in foreign currencies because when we only trade in dollars. If people buy our stuff, they have to pay in dollars. If we buy their stuff, they have to be willing to accept US dollars. We never use currencies that we're not able to create. And as long as we stick to that, we can never go into bankruptcy. Okay, so Wabin is wrong about that. But we could still face a situation where we're spending more and more on military things and where big deficits are causing inflation here at home, and where we may be unwilling to take the steps to control that sort of inflation. In World War II, we did that. We put in wage and price controls, and the wage and price controls and the sale of savings bonds drew excessive money out of the economy, okay, and kept the inflation to a very low level throughout the whole of the Second World War. We have that experience. And if we did the same thing here, we wouldn't have to suffer from overwhelming inflation. So historically, we've handled inflation before. We can handle it.
Excuse me.
Of course, we have to handle it by looking at other things besides just raising the interest rates, from the Fed. I mean, that's BS. What you have to do is really do wage and price controls and regulation. Now, whether Trump is going to do those things, okay, I don't know. He's going to have to change his thinking. He's going to have to get smarter. And he's going to have to drop the ideology coming from the right. But if he develops a survival instinct, he may be able to do those things. So I don't think the U.S. is going to go into bankruptcy. Now, we could get into a situation where if we bifurcate the world into two camps, we could run into a situation that we won't be able to buy, in international markets, some of the materials we need for our military efforts. Then we're going to have to manufacture those things ourselves, or if there are raw materials of some kind involved, we might have to learn how to synthesize those. Yeah, there are different kinds of adjustments we can make. But that's the problem we're going to have, sourcing resources that are necessary for our efforts from outside of the United States if the world breaks into two camps. Because the BRICS camp is going to be rich in natural resources. And even though, well, we don't even know at this point whether Canada is going to be part of our camp or whether Mexico is going to be part of our camp, because we've been pissing off those countries right now. And they're making some alternative arrangements. So we don't know whether they're not going to be, or whether they're going to be in our camp. But all I have to say is, if we want to go about this splitting the world into two camps, we better make damn sure the Canadians and the Chinese are in our camp. And in order to do that, we better get rid of these damn tariffs right now. Because we are alienating our best friends. And we cannot keep on doing that. Okay, but I thought this was a very interesting article. And he did make some very good points, even though he's off the deep end on the bankruptcy part of it. But we can spend far too much of our government spending on military things compared to what we spend to strengthen ourselves internally, what we spend on the real economy and what we spend on the social safety net. Trump administration, of course, is ideologically opposed to spending on the safety net. That is a fatal mistake. Because if you want to have an aggressive foreign policy that's going to isolate you from the rest of the world, you'd better give people a very good safety net so they have something to hang on to and they feel very loyal to your country. You can't make enemies all over the world and make anybody, make enemies of everybody in your own country as well. That doesn't work. Any further comments on that, Dee?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. Okay, so let's get to a piece from Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern, and the judge. I'm not going to go through the whole of this, but maybe the first 12 to 15 minutes.
Today is Monday, April 7th, 2025. Ray McGovern joins us now. Ray, always a pleasure, my dear friend. Before we have a conversation about the CIA and its role in American history and American society, and whether that role has been an asset or negative, I have to talk to you about some of the pressing issues. As we speak, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are meeting in the White House, and I can't help but think of our mutual friend Gerald Celente, one of whose favorite lines is, "When all else fails, they take you to war." I mean, the economy is tanking. Republicans are rebelling. Trump has a lot of issues at home. Netanyahu has very, very serious criminal issues against him and members of his staff also at home. Do you think the two of them are talking about when, where, and how to attack Iran?
Well, Judge, today is crucial. Netanyahu is getting the word from Trump. What that word is will eventually come out later today or tomorrow, and that's precisely when Russian, Chinese, and Iranian delegations are meeting in Moscow on the Iranian nuclear issue. So, Alistair Crook, for whom I have great respect, points out that he doesn't understand the hold that Netanyahu has on Trump. Neither do I. And so what is going to happen now is unpredictable by definition. I have a slightly different view from Alistair. It comes out of my great power chauvinist idea that there are still great powers in the world, and that it will be the US, Russia, and China that have the immediate effect on what eventuates. And I see the Russians being most interested in reaching a decent relationship with Trump, and Trump even more so placing all his eggs in the basket of a resolution of Ukraine that doesn't result in obvious abject retreat or defeat, and working out a decent relationship with Russia to do the other things he may or may not want to do in the rest of the world. Now, the point is simply that if Trump allows himself to be mousetrapped by Netanyahu for reasons that Alistair and I both understand, and if you do understand, just let us know, okay? If that happens, that's the end of détente. It's the end of rapprochement, and I see the Russians looking at as the existential, as the pinnacle of what needs to be done now in Ukraine. And I believe the Russians are willing to bargain. They had their top economic guy in Washington just over the weekend for 2 days, and he says that there are 3 steps forward. So there is a congealing of interests on the part of the Russians and the US, and that is Trump, and the Chinese, because the Chinese depend heavily on oil from Iran. I think it's around 30% of their oil. So whether this will eventuate in Trump saying, "My God, I don't care," for reasons that Alistair and Ray don't understand, I'm going with Netanyahu. Well, that's trouble, because this time, in my view, the Russians and the Chinese are not going to shrink away from making military maneuvers, threatening ones, and this could end up in an armed conflict.
Well,
So I thought that first statement of Ray's was very, very significant. He feels very strongly that Trump is oriented to making a peace with Russia, provided only that it doesn't look like a terrible defeat for the United States. I think that provided only is an important sort of qualification, because right now, and the longer this war goes on, I can't see how the idea that the peace that is imposed on Ukraine is not a defeat for the United States. The only way Trump could structure it in that way, and to me, he's almost lost the opportunity to structure it in that way. If he had come into this at the start and he had said clearly, This is not my war. This is Biden's war. And he started saying, this war would never have occurred if I was president. And this war is Biden's war, and I'm going to end it. And then he ended it quickly. And he wrapped it up in new plans of his to withdraw from Europe as quickly as possible. And he took the peace in Ukraine, he took the negotiated peace as justification for shifting our foreign policy over, finally leaving Europe, after 80 years, and coming back to America. And he sold, the Ukraine peace as facilitating that. He might have been able to sell the desirability of that to the United States and to present it rather than as a defeat, as a victory for the United States, because we disentangled ourselves from the need to defend Europe. But he hasn't done that. He hasn't pushed that. He hasn't tried to propagandize that. But it was essential to be able to do that if he was going to sell the idea that making a deal with the Russians was a victory for the United States. So that's what I think. Now, maybe he can still do that, but he doesn't seem to be framing things in that way. He's been getting himself more and more deeply involved in the war in Ukraine, even continuing to support Zelensky, when what he needed to do was as soon as possible to cut off all arms, to Zelensky and let the chips fall where they may. That's what I think he needed to do. By the way, if he had shut off all arms to Zelensky and gotten into further talks with Russia, at that point, he might have been able to get some concessions, from the Russians, because he would have essentially stopped the war and completely undermined the war effort of the Ukrainians. And the Russians, being grateful for that, might have been willing to throw a bone or two his way. I know the Europeans would have gone apeshit if that had happened. I mean, they're going apeshit anyway, when it, has not yet happened. But I think that's the logic of the situation, and that's the only way Trump could claim a victory for himself, while continuing to claim all the way that the war in Ukraine was not his war, that it was Biden's war, and Biden is to blame for any failures that come out of it. That's the way he should have played it, and he has not been playing it that way.
The reason is probably the iron grip that the Zionist lobby, the donor class, has on the government of the United States, even though, notwithstanding his refusal to acknowledge the 22nd Amendment, the president is a lame duck. Nevertheless, he has a Congress to deal with, which is very much in the grip of the Zionist lobby. But just to segue a little bit into what you were talking about, what do you think the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are talking about? Are the Iranians saying, well, you guys come to our defense, we've got to keep selling oil?
Of course they are.
If Israel and the U.S. attack.
Well, as Alistair pointed out very cogently, the die is cast. There's this executive order to do in Iran. Now, the only way I would differ from Alistair a little bit is the way you did, that the Constitution is not sacred anymore, and neither are executive orders, okay?
Yeah.
So Trump...
Well, he changes executive orders at the drop of a hat. Who knows? He may change the tariffs tomorrow if the pressure gets too
Exactly.
high with him. The problem with Trump is the uncertainty and instability caused in the markets by this. But what do you think the Russians will say if the Iranian delegation says, you got to protect us from these people? They're crazy.
Well, there is, as you know, something just short of a mutual defense treaty between Iran and Russia concluded in January. Now, Putin is very perspicacious. It is not literally a mutual defense treaty because neither side is obligated to go to the aid of the other side in the event of war, but it's almost that, okay? Each side is prohibited from aiding the enemy if some enemy attacks the other side. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means not only Russia and China, because of the oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf, are existentially involved in this thing. They don't want this kind of war, and they're capable of getting together tomorrow and saying either, "Oh God, Netanyahu got everything he wanted yesterday," or they're going to say there's still leeway, and their reaction will be shaped by their interpretation of what happens today between Netanyahu and Trump. And I dare say military action will not be excluded. Not only air defense help for Iran, which they have considerable already, but I see the Chinese threatening Taiwan in ways they have seldom done before. They can easily put a ring around Taiwan and do a little embargo. They could cause all kinds of trouble that Trump doesn't expect because he's got no brainers advising him. So the ball is in the court of Netanyahu and Trump today. Tomorrow it's in Moscow, where the three. And bear in mind, Wang Yi, that incredibly apt and adept foreign minister of China, visited Putin just a week ago. So they're preparing for the worst here. They're reading Trump as being not only mercurial, but unpredictable, sort of redundancy there. But that means a lot. And what happens today will sort of set the tone for the meeting tomorrow in Moscow.
So,
okay, at this point, I probably should say that there are reports that in indirect talks behind the scenes between the United States and Iran, that Trump has been backing off his full demands that we read, okay, in detail in the Alistair Crook pieces and the Mike Whitney pieces. The thrust of the results of the indirect talks is that Trump is willing to withdraw from all the demands, okay, except the demand that Iran give up, its nuclear capability, but it could keep all the defensive capability it has, all the missile capability that it has, all the naval capability, okay, that it has. Okay, it just would have to submit to inspections that would show that it was nowhere near having, a nuclear weapon. Now, what Iran would demand in return for that, I don't know. If I'm the Iranians, it seems to me that I want to get something for that. And what I want to get has to come out of the hide of Israel, some way or other. Everybody knows that Israel has these weapons. Okay, if I'm Iran, what I have to do is to insist that the Israeli nuclear arms be neutered. Now, I'm not so naive as to think there could be an agreement on that sort, but I think Iran has to negotiate for something along those lines, because that kind of asymmetry and capability forever is not something that I believe they can tolerate. Now, how could the two sides come to agreement over that? Well, I think it's going to depend a lot on the Russians and Chinese, on what they're offering in order to get Trump to back off the demand. Perhaps if the Iranians agree to back off from being close to, having nuclear weapons, and if they agree to inspections to continue to enforce that, so they can't get anywhere near the threshold of, 90% of enrichment, okay, of the uranium they have. If they give into that, then what protections would they be afforded by China and Russia if they agreed to that? What kinds of concessions would the Chinese and Russians be willing to give in terms of guarantees to Iran that if Israel resorts to nuclear weapons, that they will agree to wipe out Israel? Something like that, I think, has to be done, okay, in order for Iran to agree that they will never get any nuclear weapons. Anyway, that's one part of a larger negotiation, okay, involving the other powers. If Russia makes some concessions to Trump, okay, in Europe, then and Russia and China provide some guarantees to Iran to protect it, okay, and the U.S. is more forthcoming about forcing Israel to accept a two-state solution, something constructive can really come out, okay, of all this. But I don't think Iran can agree to give up the potential of getting a nuclear bomb within a couple of weeks without getting some measure of protection from the Israelis. That has to come out of this in some way, or there is not going to be an agreement. And that's what I think. Part of the negotiations also has to be, from my point of view, to inform Trump's team and his negotiators of what the military realities are on the ground. Because I believe they're very misinformed, okay, today about the degree of leverage they have over the Iranians, because they don't understand the military realities. Let's go further into that idea. I think Ray is going to go further into the idea of whether they're getting information that is close to the truth from the American intelligence agencies.
We both know, you and I, and most people watching us know, that the American intelligence assessment is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon and hasn't been working on one for going back as far as 2007. This is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the universal assessment of the American intelligence community.
It was
Does-
unanimous, and it was expressed with high confidence. And it was November 2007, saying they stopped back in the end of 2003, had not resumed. And the most recent threat assessment said that the Supreme Leader has shown no indication that he is going to reauthorize this, that he unauthorized back at the end of 2003. That's 22 years ago, if my math is right, Judge.
Unbelievable.
So,
Does,
so
does,
you have
does
some break
Mossad
on this.
does Mossad share the same assessment? They must.
Of course, they lie through their teeth. They come up with laptops that show the opposite. But the analysts in Mossad are quite clear on what the situation is. And so is Netanyahu. Netanyahu, as we all know, is in real domestic difficulties. Whether that will be enough for him to persuade his friend Trump to bail him out in a most dangerous way, I don't understand it. I don't know, but that's what they'll be talking about tomorrow in Moscow.
Realistically speaking, is Iran a threat to the United States? Is Iran a threat to Israel?
No, and it's perceived to be a threat to Israel because it's the only power that's capable of preventing greater Israel. Now, the U.S. has supported Israel up the kazoo, Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, for God's sake. And Iran has always been the next in the crosshairs. I mean, back in 2002, 2003, the neocons were saying, real men go to Tehran, not Baghdad. Well, they acquiesced. They did Baghdad first, and then Syria, and then Libya. And, it never ends. And so what's happening in Moscow is sui generis. We have a completely different constellation of forces. The old Soviets used to say, the balance, the correlation of forces in the world, okay? Well, they correlate in a way where Russia and China are now the strong lines on this isosceles triangle. And the isosceles triangle has the U.S. on the short end of the stick. They're going to impress the U.S. upon that tomorrow, whatever the result is. And they're going to say, look, we will not look, the old phrase, we will not stand idly by if you attack Iran. The whole thing now is prevention.
Yeah.
And I think that they will be able to prevent this. If not, then we have a different question.
Let me just segue a little bit, and then we'll get back to this. Suppose the IDF captures and conquers Damascus. What will the reaction be?
Well, they can do that, of course. Whether they would do that in an unnecessary way, I mean, they got what they want in Syria now. I don't know. The reaction would be, well, we would denounce it. We would say, well, that's not really a good idea, but sotto voce, we would support it. Now, that could come to an end today, as even now Trump is talking to Netanyahu. They're both unpredictable, but Netanyahu is in trouble deep, as we used to say in the comic books. He's in deep trouble, okay?
Right.
And so whether Trump will let Netanyahu's domestic difficulties, he may well end up in jail in that bridal suite with his wife, okay? If he's going to let that inform U.S. policy, we're all in trouble, and the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are going to say, no, you're not going to do that this time. This is a bridge too far, in my view.
The demands that Trump has made on Iran would almost emasculate it, if complied with, would almost emasculate it of its sovereignty. No nuclear weapons, no ballistic missiles, no offensive weaponry. I mean, it is one thing to make demands that are difficult. It's another thing to make demands that are impossible.
Well,
why would Iran even consider complying with that? And what is Trump trying to do? Demanding something that they can't comply with, or will bomb you like you've never been bombed before?
Just as before Iraq, and I know this to be the case, those position papers are formed, drafted, given to the Pentagon or the NSC by Mossad, by the Israeli government. This is the maximalist position. And of course, Trump is well known for high level bluster. None of those terms, none of them, zero, can be acquiesced in by a sovereign power. And this time it's different. There's a treaty with Russia. There are agreements with China, and both Russia, China, and Iran have practiced naval exercises for this last couple of years. It's dangerous territory for Trump. He needs to realize that Iran is not in this alone. And once again, I'll go back to my major point here. I think both Trump and Putin are putting priority on creating a better situation in the US. So I've seen this before. And when they give priority to that, you get things like mutual arms reductions. You get all kinds of things.
Right.
And let the other equities acquiesce in a little while, and we'll come back to those. But I think that's the preliminary thing. But again, I come out of a great power chauvinist point of view. And of course, Alistair comes out of as a real expert on the Middle East. Well, let 100 flowers bloom.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope Alistair is right. But I'm terrified because I don't know who's meeting with Trump and Netanyahu. I don't think they're going to meet alone. I'm sure Netanyahu has his own advisors with him. Whoever Trump brings to that meeting, or whomever he confers with as soon as he finishes the meeting.
Snap your W-2 and file your taxes 100% free. Plus, get your biggest refund. File free.
We know one thing for certain: will be an ardent Zionist, There will be nobody there saying, well, did you consider this? Well, did you consider that? Why should we do everything that Netanyahu wants? Iran doesn't pose a threat to us. I don't even know if those countervailing arguments will be offered to President Trump.
Well, Judge, you can be sure that the Director of National Intelligence was encouraged very strongly to change her view and to do what they did before Iraq, prostitute the intelligence the process and say, oh, by the way, Netanyahu just gave us 2 more laptops, which show that Iran is now this close to a nuclear weapon. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, to her credit, whatever else you say about it, she resisted those pressures. So now it's going to be unlike this previous run, which was when Bush and Cheney were exiting the scene in 2008 and 2007. They were preparing to attack Iran with Israel. And some perspicacious person who was still around in Washington said, let's do an estimate. And that estimate was the one in November of 2007, which said unanimously with high confidence, Iran has stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003. Now, for her to reiterate that under these circumstances deprives Trump of that pretext, just as Bush was deprived of it. And as he wrote in his book, Decision Points, mind you, this was a bummer for, quote, how could I possibly authorize an attack on the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program, period, end quote. Bummer. So they went into the Western sunset without attacking Iran. Whether that will happen this time or not depends on a most mercurial, a most unpredictable person, and whether someone like Tulsi Gabbard or maybe in Witkoff, he said, well, wait a second, I forgot to tell you, Mr. President, this could mean a regional war, it could mean a world war. Maybe we ought to ease off a bit. This is slim read to rely on. But I think when we see what they come out with in Moscow tomorrow, we'll have a better idea as how strong the support that Iran thinks it can rely on now, how strong it is.
How dangerous is the Central Intelligence Agency to American national security?
Extremely dangerous. They assassinate presidents. And I would say, Judge, this is serious, okay? If I were an advisor, if I were bringing the PDB, the President's Daily Brief, to Mr. Putin, as I did to Mr. Reagan, I would have to say, Mr. Putin, Last time a American president reached out to have a decent relationship with Russia, to negotiate and to realize that we were allies one big time 80 years ago. Last time that happened, they killed him, all right? So Trump is trying to do that now, okay? Be aware. They may well do the same thing to him. And so the consequences are make a deal with him while he's still around. You have some leeway on Ukraine. He wants a deal. Give him enough to prevent him from totally capitulating, and then we can have a decent relationship. That is a big deal. He wants it. You want it, but realize he may not be around very much longer. They may well do him in because the majority of people in Washington want to instill hate for you. They've done a wonderful job for the last 8 years or so.
Does the CIA continue to have even under Ratcliffe, Gabbard, and Trump, the operations branch that foments coups and kills people?
Of course they do. And let me just remind people, George Kennan, my hero, okay? When I was beginning to realize what the Soviet Union was, he said lots of things. But one of the most recent things he said before he died was, my greatest mistake was in 1948 authorizing the CIA to conduct sabotage, all manner of things with express permission from the President of the United States. Okay. So the legislation in 1947 said that the CIA can perform such other functions and duties as the president shall from time to time direct, but the next resolution by the NSC, authored by Kennan, said they could expressly do all these other things. Look it up. And Kennan said that was the biggest mistake I made in my whole career. So there you have it. And watch out, Mr. Trump. The stakes are so high. The people that try to do you in during your first 4 years and tried to prevent you from being president in the first place in 2016, they're still around. If you let those papers out, they will be criminally liable. They have lots of incentive to make sure that you're not around very much longer. I do not exaggerate. I've been around. Well, I've been around.
Someone else who
Okay, so that's Ray. And that's the very important thing he has to say, that there is a threat from the operational branch of the CIA. Whether you believe that or not, it's certainly probable that that branch of the CIA is having an effect on CIA threat assessments, with respect to Iran. Now, in previous streams here, we have pointed out that there seems to be a screen preventing Trump from learning what the truth is about the capabilities of Iran. That's probably due to the fact that there are false assessments of the strength of Iran that are getting conveyed to Trump. As long as Trump doesn't learn how capable Iran is, as long as he doesn't consider the possibility seriously that the Iranians are so capable that the United States won't be able to mount a successful attack on Iran, as long as he doesn't see that possibility, he is free to go ahead with implementing his threat if he isn't able to come to agreement with Iran. But as I said earlier in the stream, if he knows what the reality is with respect to the current attack on Ansarallah and the current failures of that attack, He's perfectly capable of coming to the conclusion himself that if they're not even able to take out the Ansarallah people and prevent them from continuing their attacks on Israel and on the American ships, then how can the United States expect to be successful against Iran? If somebody can make that point, okay, to Mr. Trump, he may then back off trying to put Iran into the corner, and he may be more willing to actually negotiate with Iran and to make certain concessions. So, that was the last thing I wanted to say concerning this. I think the CIA is a threat, okay, in the background of all this, because I think that the CIA and Mossad, okay, are producing assessments that distort the conventional military capability that Iran has. I think they're making Iran seem as though they're very vulnerable to a United States attack. And this, of course, gives Trump the incentive to continue pushing hard on that. And that's a very bad incentive for him to have, okay, right now. If we're to have peace, he needs to have some measure of healthy fear of what happens if the assessments he's heard are not correct, and Iran can turn aside a serious combined attack from the United States and Israel. Ray mentioned in his treatment that what happened, okay, today with Trump, okay, and Netanyahu would have some relevance for tomorrow when Russia, Iran, and China meet and what they decide to do, okay, in their meeting. I think is right. There will be some impact. I do have to mention that in the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump and the public discussion of what they talked about, but Trump stated that the Iranians had agreed to direct talks with the Americans. Right after that public statement, the Iranians came out and directly contradicted what Trump had to say. Said they never agreed to any direct talks. There will not be direct talks. There will only be indirect talks with Oman as the intermediaries between ourselves and Iran. And so Trump is doing something he often does when he gets involved in trying to negotiate with somebody. He circulates false information about what they've actually agreed to. I don't think the Iranians are having any of that. And that's got to have a bearing, okay, on the negotiations that Russia and China are going to have with Iran. Well, it's probably today in Russia by this time. So the negotiations are probably going on close to now. In other words, they may have already started. They may be starting very shortly. Anyway, this brings us, well, let me see if there are more comments. Sandy is here. Hi, Sandy. Very nice to see you. Okay. Evelina says 5 books of Moses, the Torah, appear in the Bible. Yes. Sandy Deck says, hi, Steve. Hi, Earl. Sandy shared. Earl says, hi, Sandy. And even it says, according to Ray McGovern, the U.S. president should be fearful of the CIA and the Mossad. Sobering, to say the least. Yeah, the truth has come out over a very long period of time that Jack Kennedy, was likely assassinated by a rogue group inside of the operational structure of the CIA. So it was not evidently the high-level intention of the CIA to assassinate the president, but they were rogue groups that have enough power to do so. And that may be the same situation today. We do not know. So that is sobering, to say the least, okay, as Evelina says. Okay, let's get to the final article. Okay, would you like to take that on, or would you rather have me do it, Dee?
You can take it on.
Okay. I will then take it on. It's a piece about the very negotiations which are about to take place between Russia, Iran, and China. The title of it is Russia, Iran, China, All for One and One for All. And it's by Pepe Escobar, and it was written earlier today, or at least was published here earlier today in the UNS Review. And there's a graphic with Trump kind of having a very concerned expression on his face when he contemplates the talks between Xi and Putin and the president of Iran, Mr. Pezeshkian. That graphic was from the Cradle, so this article was originally published, okay, in the Cradle, and not here at the UNS Review. Although perhaps not yet obvious to Washington, the U.S. war on Iran will be viewed as one against Russia and China too. Both Putin and Xi, no, the Trump's war, is singularly directed at the transformational global changes they are driving together. But Russia and Iran are at the forefront of the multi-layered Eurasia integration process, the most crucial geopolitical development of the young 21st century. Both the top members of BRICS Plus and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Both are seriously implicated as global majority leaders to build a multinodal, multipolar world, and both have signed in late January in Moscow a detailed, comprehensive strategic partnership. The second administration of U.S. President Donald Trump, starting with the maximum pressure, quote-unquote, antics employed by the bombastic circus ringmaster himself, seems to ignore these imperatives, says Pepe. It was up to the Russian Foreign Ministry to reintroduce rationality in what was fast becoming an out-of-control shouting match. Essentially, Moscow, alongside its partner Tehran, simply will not accept outside threats of bombing Iran's nuclear and energy infrastructure, while insisting on the search for viable negotiated solutions for the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. And then, just like lightning, the Washington narrative changed. U.S. Special Envoy for Middle East Affairs, Stephen Witkoff, not exactly a Metternich, that's a reference to the Austrian Prime Minister, who was the most important figure in Austria-Hungary for a very, very long period of time in the early 19th century, and who was the leading enforcer of the concert of Europe through this time, which defeated France and constrained France, Okay, anyway, Metternich was known to be a master diplomat, so here the references to Metternich. Stephen Witkoff, not exactly a Metternich, previously a quote, maximum pressure, unquote, hardliner, started talking about the need for, quote, confidence building, unquote, and even, quote, resolving disagreements, unquote, implying Washington began, quote, seriously considering, unquote, according to the proverbial, quote, um, 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 quote, officials, unquote, indirect nuclear talks. These implications turned to reality on Monday afternoon when Trump allegedly blindsided the visiting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with the announcement of a, quote, very big meeting, unquote, with Iranian officials in the next few days. Tehran later confirmed the news with Iran's foreign minister, whose name is Abbas Araghchi, saying he would engage in indirect nuclear negotiations with Witkoff in Oman on Saturday. So they're both going to go to Oman to engage in indirect negotiations. I wonder just how that's going to happen. It's as if Trump had at least listened to the arguments exposed by the Islamic Republic's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But then he can change his mind in a Trump New York minute. I think the expression is a New York second, but that's all right. The finest points of the Russian-Iran-China axis. Essential background to decipher the, quote, will Russia help Iran, unquote, conundrum can be found in these all too diplomatic exchanges at the Valdai Club in Moscow. So here is Pepe with some information on the talks. So some of these talks then between Russia, Iran, and China have already occurred. I had thought they were about to happen, but evidently they have already occurred. The key points were made by Alexander Mariasov, Russia's ambassador to Iran from 2001 to 2005. He argues that the Russia-Iran treaty is not only a symbolic milestone, but, quote, serves as a roadmap for advancing our cooperation across virtually all domains, unquote. It is more of, quote, a bilateral relations document, unquote, not a defense treaty. The treaty was extensively discussed and approved as a counterpoint to, quote, the intensified military, political, and economic pressure exerted by Western nations on both Russia and Iran. The main rationale was how to fight against the sanctions tsunami. Yet even if it does not constitute a military alliance, the treaty details mutually agreed moves if there is an attack or threats to either nation's national security, as in Trump's careless bombing threats against Iran. The treaty also defines the vast scope of military technical defense cooperation, including, crucially, regular intel talk. Mr. Mariasov identified the key security points as the Caspian Sea, the South Caucasus, Central Asia, and last but not least, West Asia, including the breadth and reach of the axis of resistance. The official Moscow position on the axis of resistance is an extremely delicate affair. For instance, let's look at Yemen. Moscow does not officially recognize the Yemeni resistance government embodied by Ansarallah with its HQ in the capital Sana'a. Rather, it recognizes, just like Washington, a puppet government in Aden, which is in fact housed in a 5-star hotel in Riyadh, sponsored by Saudi Arabia. Last summer, two different delegations from Yemen were visiting Moscow. As I witnessed it, the Sanaa delegation faced tremendous bureaucratic problems to, to clinch uh, but to clinch official meetings. There is, of course, sympathy for Ansar across Moscow intel and military circles, but as confirmed in Sana'a with a member of the High Political Council, these contacts occur via privileged channels, quote unquote, and not institutionally. Same applies to Lebanon's Hezbollah, which was a key Russian ally in routing ISIS and other Islamist extremist groups during the Syrian war. When it comes to Syria, the only thing that matters for official Moscow, after the Al Qaeda linked extremists took power in Damascus last December, is to preserve the Russian bases in Tartus and in Main Meme. Okay, I guess it's Main Meme, that's the H must be silent at the beginning. There's no question that the Syrian debacle was an extremely serious setback for both Moscow and Tehran, further aggravated by Trump's nonstop escalation over Iran's nuclear program and his, quote, maximum pressure, quote, obsession. The nature of the Russia-Iran treaty differs substantially from that of Russia-China. For Beijing, the partnership with Moscow is so solid, it develops so dynamically, that they don't even need a treaty. They have a, quote, comprehensive strategic partnership. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in his recent visit to Russia after coining a pearl, quote, those who live in the 21st century but think in Cold War blocks and zero-sum games cannot keep up with the times, unquote, neatly summarized Sino-Russia relations in three vectors. The two Asian giants are, quote, forever friends, okay, and are never enemies, unquote. Equality and mutually beneficial cooperation, non-alignment with blocs, non-confrontation, and non-targeting of third parties. So even as we have a Russian-Iran treaty between China and Russia and China and Iran, we have essentially close partnerships. Witness, for instance, the fifth joint Russia-Iran-China naval exercises that took place in the Gulf of Oman in March. This trilateral strategy is not new. It has been under development for years. But it's lazy to characterize this improved RIC, Primakov Triangle, Russia, Iran, China, instead of Russia, India, China, as an alliance. The only, quote, alliance, unquote, that exists today on the geopolitical chessboard is NATO, a warmongering outfit composed of intimidated vassals corralled together by the empire of chaos. I think he should have said corral together. Maybe that is corral. Could be that's the way you spell corral, but I thought it was different. Cue to yet another hard to resist Wang Yi jade pearl. Quote, the U.S. is sick, but forces others to take the medicine, unquote. Takeaways. Russia is not switching sides. China won't be encircled, and Iran will be defended. When the new Primakov Triangle meets in Beijing, at the Valdai discussion, Daniel Meshkin Ranjbar, assistant professor in the Department of Theory and History of International Relations at the Moscow-based RUDN University, made a crucial point. Quote, for the first time in history, the diplomatic outlooks of Russia and Iran converge, unquote. He's referring to the obvious parallels between official policies. Russia's, quote, pivot to the east, and Iran's, quote, look east, unquote, policies. All those interconnections plainly escape the new administration in Washington, as well as bombastic Trump, Netanyahu rhetoric that has zero basis in reality. Even the U.S. National Security Council admitted that Iran is not working on a nuclear bomb. And that brings us to the big picture. The circus ringmaster, at least until he changes his mind again, is essentially working on a triangulation deal, allegedly offering Russia a transportation framework, access to grain exports in the Black Sea, and Russian banks off the sanction list of SWIFT, so he may execute his pivot to then attack Iran, but deadline to Tehran included. And if Russia defends Iran, no deal. That's as mendacious as mafia style, quote, offer you can't refuse, unquote, maximum pressure can get. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, an exceptionally able diplomat, destroyed the whole rationale. Quote, Russia cannot accept U.S. proposals to end the war in Ukraine in their current form because they do not solve the problems Moscow considers the cause of the conflict, unquote. Even as Moscow, quote, takes the models and solutions proposed by the Americans very seriously, unquote. As the Russian angle of Trump's triangulation falters, Tehran is not merely watching the river flow. How Iran adapted for decades to a sanctioned tsunami is now firm knowledge deeply shared with Moscow, part of their deepening cooperation enshrined in the treaty. For all of Trump's volatility, non-Zionist contaminated voices across the Beltway are slowly but surely imprinting the rational view that a war on Iran is absolutely suicidal for the empire itself. So the odds resurface that Trump's 2.0 verbal barrages may be paving the way for a temporary deal that will be spun to death. After all, this is always a battle of narratives as a diplomatic victory. Bets can be made that the only leader on the planet capable of making Trump understand reality is Russian President Vladimir Putin in the next phone call. After all, it is the circus ringmaster himself who created the revamped nuclear Iran, unquote, drama, RIC, or the revamped Primakov triangle, duly addressed it together in a crucial, discreet, not publicized recent meeting in Beijing, as confirmed by diplomatic sources. Essentially, the RIC has developed a, quote, nuclear Iran, unquote, roadmap. These are the highlights, quote, dialogue, no escalation, no, quote, maximum pressure, unquote, step-by-step moves build mutual confidence. As Iran re-emphasizes its veto on developing nuclear weapons, the much-debated international community, actually the UN Security Council, recognizes again Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy under the NPT. Back to the JCPOA and reboot it to get Trump back on board. The reboot will be an extremely hard sell. The roadmap was ratified during a second round of RIC trilateral talks in Moscow on Tuesday, that's today, where senior officials from the allied nations discussed collaborative efforts to address the challenges faced by Iran. That summit in Moscow. As it stands, the roadmap is just that, a map. The breathless Zionist access from Washington and Tel Aviv will continue to insist that Iran, if attacked, will not be supported by Russia, and extra nonstop, quote, maximum pressure, unquote, will force Tehran to eventually fold and abandon its support to the axis of resistance. All that once again eschews reality. For Moscow, Iran is an absolutely key geopolitical priority. Beyond Iran to the east is Central Asia. The Zionist obsessive fantasy of regime change in Iran masks NATO's then penetrating into Central Asia, building military bases, and at the same time blocking several strategically crucial Chinese Belt and Road Initiative projects. Iran is as essential to China's long-term foreign policy as it is to Russia. It's not by accident that Russia and China will meet at the presidential level for Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping at a summit in Moscow around the 9th of May, Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War. They will be analyzing in detail the next stage of, quote, changes that we have not seen in 100 years, unquote, as formulated by Xi to Putin in the groundbreaking 2023 summer in Moscow. They, of course, will be discussing how the circus ringmaster dreams of closing down one forever war just to start another, the specter of U.S.-Israel attack on their strategic partner, Iran, complete with the counterpunch of blocking the Strait of Hormuz transit for 24 million barrels of oil a day, a barrel of oil skyrocketing to $200 and even more, and the collapse of the humongous 730 trillion pile of derivatives in the global economy. No, President Circus Ringmaster, you don't have the cards, says Pepe Escobar. And he's right. The circus ringmaster doesn't have the cards because he can't really stand the collapse of the humongous $730 trillion pile of derivatives in the global economy. He can't possibly want to destroy that. And so in the end, he's not going to take the risk. He's not going to counterpunch by blocking the Strait of Hormuz. He's not going to attack with Israel on Iran because of fear of the counterpunch of blocking the Strait of Hormuz and collapsing the global economy, the 730 trillion pile of derivatives. So summarize this. What Pepe thinks is that Russia and China are going to do all they can to assist Iran in case of attack, that they're going to do all they can to stop the necessity of the counterpunch. And they think that he thinks Trump is also going to have an incentive to avoid that kind of chaos. And that when Putin talks to Trump and explains the realities of what is likely to happen if they attempt to attack Iran. Now, I think what is likely going to happen is that Iran will be able to turn aside most, if not all, of the attack because of their assets in the missile area. And I think the response to such an attack is also going to be a devastating attack upon Israel. It will be a non-nuclear attack. But we don't know what the other features of it are going to be because we don't know whether Russian assistance to Iran, I already did that, is going to supply the Iranians with a few of the Oreshniks to help them out. I don't know whether Russia would do that, but they could, couldn't they? That could be part of the help. Then the Iranians could probably devastate key power centers inside of Israel with maybe 5 Oreshniks or something like that. They would not need, nuclear weapons. But also the Iranians have thousands of missiles to expend in destroying key targets, in Israel. There was speculation that the Houthis would be able to put 1,000 missiles, onto Dimona. Well, the Iranians can do much worse. I don't think a U.S.-Israel attack on Iran is going to be a happy day for Israel for the U.S., for their allies. Iran has already warned all of the Sunni allies of the United States that if they give any assistance to an air attack coming from the U.S. and coming from Israel to Iran, that they will retaliate very seriously against those um, Sunni allies. And they all are vulnerable to Iranian missile attacks. All the U.S. bases are as well. So is Israel, um, um, fully vulnerable. I don't believe, as I've stated often here, that Israel has the military capability to win, okay, in such a war. If the U.S. wants to use its gravity bombs and drop them from the B-2s and B-52s, well, the B-2s and the B-52s still have to get, to Iranian airspace. I don't think the Iranian air defense systems is going to let them get to that. I don't think the gravity bombs are going to be very useful in that particular situation. It remains to be seen, of course, but it's a highly risky move for Trump to make. Putin will be telling him that, and I think he is likely to listen to Putin. Because I don't think Putin has lied to him in the past. See, there is this problem of lies, okay, and honesty. Lots of people have been lying to Trump. When he hears contrary information from Putin, he's going to have to reflect on his relationship with Putin going back in time. And I don't believe Putin has lied to him in the past. I think he's been careful not to lie to him. In the first Trump administration, people were complaining that Trump was evidently putting more store in what Putin had to say to him than he was in what our own CIA was saying to him. There might have been very good reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
Trump was noticing that he was getting false information from the CIA, but that Putin was telling him the truth. That may be why he paid more attention to Putin. It's possible that when Putin talks to him about the military realities involved, okay, in bombing Iran, that will be the last straw in his backing off. Okay, evidently, Steve Witkoff has gotten a whiff of reality already, and he and Trump have started backing off the demands for direct um, um, talks and are accepting the indirect talks in the context of Oman. That's a step forward. Okay. And of course, there's talk of serious considerations of other changes, when it comes to the demands. In this piece by Pepe Escobar, he talks about Russia, China, and Iran putting things into the framework of the UN and re-expressing, the Iranian guarantee that they will not move to nuclear weapons, but that they will concentrate only on the peaceful use, okay, of nuclear power. We have to see how that develops inside the Security Council. There may come out of this, okay, an inspection scheme, for Iran, to make sure this occurs. But I think that's the only compromise that Iran, Russia, and China will be interested in making. And apart from that kind of action inside of the UN to meet with Trump's concerns, I think there will also be guarantees from Russia and China to directly defend Iran in case of attack from the United States and Israel. That's what I think is going to happen. I think everything points, in that way. I think the conflict still remains a dangerous situation because Trump is very unpredictable. Everybody knows that he's unpredictable and knows that he can change his views in a New York minute. I like to say a New York second.
Mm-hmm.
So that volatility continues to characterize the situation. But I think there's a good chance that Trump is going to withdraw from the bluster now, and that they may be able to come to a practical agreement that, while not acceptable or popular with the Israelis, will be one that the Israelis will have to swallow. Whether Iran will be able to get further concessions, like the stopping of the genocide or not, I don't know. But without that also occurring, you can probably count on Iran to make some future hypersonic missile attacks against Israel. So there's going to be that kind of trade-off. If Israel wants to stop the hypersonic attacks, it's going to have to and stop an increase in the hypersonic attacks, because Hezbollah seems ready to renew attacks on Israel. And if the Iranians are ready also,
Mm-hmm.
if the United States and Israel want to stop that, they're going to have to stop the genocide, and they're probably going to have to agree to talks about a two-state solution in Palestine, at long last. I know the probability of that seems low at this point, but this is an extremely fluid and volatile situation. I think the Netanyahu government can well fall. I think that's a possibility. And if it does, then all kinds of other things are possible there, even though there, are a majority of the Israel who may favor the genocide. There doesn't seem to be the same zeal to pursue it that the Israeli right wing has, as far as the rest of Israel is concerned. The others may see the practicality of stopping the wars and trying to go back to a peaceful solution. But we will see.
Definitely, we will see.
Any further comments, Dee?
Mm. I think you made a good assessment. And the one thing is that Trump doesn't want a wide-scale war. He, you know, he-
He doesn't seem to really want one because, for one thing, he wants to turn to China.
exactly.
He can't turn to China if he's mired inside the Middle East. Of course, he doesn't think he's going to be mired inside of the Middle East because he's envisioning a rapid and killing attack on Iran, destroying its capabilities. But if Putin can persuade him that that's not possible, then his choice is, do I negotiate? Do I move for peace inside the Middle East so I can turn to China? Or do I get mired in West Asia in a long war with Iran, which could bring down, the whole U.S. empire?
Right. And he didn't, and something, that meeting with Netanyahu, that didn't go over well in the Israeli press, especially since they noted that, at the press conference, that Netanyahu had no idea that they were meeting with, the Trump administration was going to be meeting with Iran. So it kind of showed kind of the power in Trump's hand that he really wasn't. Oh, then plus he wouldn't undo the tariffs on Israel either. So
Yes,
it wasn't a good show for Netanyahu.
yes.
And I think Trump will, like you said, your assessment with Putin. Putin has never lied to him.
We're
You know,
assuming Putin, okay, has never lied to him, but I think that's likely to be true.
right? And where everybody knows Netanyahu, he's a liar. I mean,
Yes, everybody knows Netanyahu lies all the time, including Trump. Okay, and I believe that Putin's experience with Trump has been that he has been careful to tell Trump the truth as he sees it.
yes,
Okay, I don't think he's been deceptive with Trump. And I think that's a key.
that's a key. And you know something too. When Witkoff goes and he's over there meeting with Iran, he's going to get their deep down perspective and stuff that he most likely hasn't heard before.
Right. And he's going to bring that back to Trump and he's going to tell Trump what that perspective is. And what's that? Oh, I see. Sorry, it's my Roku. It's
Okay.
acting up. I don't know why. Let me just turn that off. I'll hit it later. I don't know what caused that. It's probably something I can easily fix. So okay, so then when Trump does talk to Putin and he hears, a similar thing from Putin, he's going to start calculating the risks better.
Yes.
And he's not necessarily going to side with the assessment of the risks coming out of the Defense Department. Okay, where I think Hegseth is likely to lie to Trump because he wants to bomb Iran.
Oh yeah, he's all in with that whole Greater Israel, and he's all,
Yeah,
his mindset is
greater
just
Israel. He's in with the idea of Greater Israel, but
yes,
that has not been the position of the Defense Department itself. So
right,
he's
and
not getting information from below him, which is not consistent with what he wants to do.
right, because he's living in that evangelical bubble.
Yes, yes, he's gung ho. But Trump, must know that about him.
Oh, I'm sure he does.
And so he's probably going to compensate for that because he'll probably know he's not getting the truth from Hegseth.
Definitely not.
He'll probably talk to Tulsi more. Well, we'll see what happens. And I suppose we'll be hearing soon, before any attack, about further telephone calls that Trump and Putin are going to have. Who knows what kind of deal they're going to concoct? I don't know, but it will probably be informed by the talks that Putin and Xi are now having, with the Iranians. So I think that's going to influence things too. So maybe things are looking up. I sure hope so.
Same here. I hope so.
So Joe Logan says, hello, people. And he says the Bible has truth, but has been altered, and over 40 books were left out. You can't access those books without approval from the Vatican. You mean there are no copies of any of these books except the
Yeah,
Vatican has all the copies in the world?
yeah. There was 40 books that were just locked up in the Vatican. And the Vatican is the one that decided what books were going to be used to make up this Bible.
Oh, I
You
know.
know, so it's crazy.
Well, that's certainly true with the King James Bible. Okay, but there must be other versions of the Bible out there, which contain some of the 40 books in them. Okay, but anyway, on the idea that the Bible has truth. Okay, the Bible has those 40 books, plus all the books that were brought into the Bible. Well, off the top of my head, I don't know how many books there are in the Bible. Okay, at this point, what is it, 15, 20?
I don't know.
Whatever. Okay, but whatever the number is, uh, if you have a piece of literature that is that long, it's going to have some true statements in it, and it's going to have some false statements in it, and it's going to have some statements that are neither true nor false, and it's going to have some statements in it that are absolutely meaningless.
Mhm.
And so it's got all kind of crap in it. And you can just about support any position you want to support by selectively quoting from the Bible.
That's what they do.
And you obviously can support the idea of genocide from the Bible also, because that comes from the book of Joshua and from Genesis. So there it is. I mean, there it is. Yes, there's some truth in the Bible, and there's an awful lot of falsehood. I'm sure the same is true of the Quran, and I'm sure the same is true. Well, there are different versions of the Bible, of course. There's the Jewish version of the Bible, and there's the Christian version of the Bible, and those are very different, because the New Testament isn't part of the Jewish version of the Bible, right? So there it is. There are different versions, and they're all full of some mix of truth and falsehoods. So I guess that's all we have to say for tonight, right, Dee?
That's it. And we just have to, like we said, each day is just take each day as it comes, and it's crazy reality we're living in.
Okay, each day is a new day, and it's crazy reality. Right now, I only plan to be back on Saturday this week.
Okay.
I have to take the middle of the week off to have some time to do other business. Okay. And I'll be back to a fuller schedule as soon as I can, but I think for the next few weeks it's going to be this way. So I'm very happy that you all could come tonight, and thank you, Dee, for sharing this stream with me.
You're welcome. And also mention to everybody about your situation, and if they could, contribute to your Patreon account.
If you can contribute to my Patreon account, that would certainly help. Okay, I would, very much appreciate that. Uh, okay, and so please help. That's all I guess I have to say about that. And you see my Patreon account, it's right under my picture there on the screen, patreon.com Joe _ Firestone. And Dee, if you would like to give them your addresses too, that would be great.
Yeah, pretty much it's Dolores Pierce, whether it's Venmo, Cash App, and PayPal. It's all Dolores Pierce. And Joe and Bonnie, are on a fixed income, and we know how the prices have been going up, and it's just not easy. And the craziness with Trump,
Now,
it's too much.
it's likely to go increasingly crazier.
Hmm.
So if you value this stream, please do contribute. Okay, small amounts are fine. Every little bit helps.
Definitely.
So thank you very much. And I will see you on Saturday. I'm sure Dee will have some good streams during the week going on.
Yes, I'll be tomorrow night, and I've got to contact Madeline to see if she's available. Madeline has a book that's going to be coming out, and she also wrote this article where Cory Booker was concerned. So I've got to contact Madeline and see what's up.
So you may be talking about those things tomorrow night.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, very good. And again, thank you for coming tonight, Dee.
Oh, you're welcome. It's good to be here, and thank you, everybody. And hello, Sandy Degg says hello, Dee. Well, Dolores. And thank you, Sandy. And Sandy's the best share around.
She is the very best share around. So thank you, Sandy. And thank you, Earl. And thank you, Steve. Evelina, thank you very much for all your comments. And Joe Logan, thank you for coming as well. It's nice to see you too.
Yes.
So goodbye, everyone.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
And
Good night, Bonnie.
thank all those who have not commented,
Mm-hmm.
but have it here. Attendance was pretty good tonight, and we know most of that attendance is coming from Twitter.
Yes.
So,
Thank you.
yes, thank you very much.
And good night, all.
Okay, good night, all. We will see you soon.